this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin. Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. I guess it was probably 1998. Had a student that came to the medical examiner's office that had been chosen for one of the coveted undergraduate ride-along internship programs that we offered over the summer. And back then, most of them required a face-to-face interview. But this individual had sent their resume in, and it was very impressive. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you what university they were with. They were actually from a university in my hometown of New Orleans. They were from Tulane. And this individual was a physical anthropology major, had plans on going to the University of Tennessee to work on graduate work at the Body Farm. Very impressive stuff. But then on the day that they were supposed to be there, they showed up. I have never seen anything like it in my life. Think a combination of Morticia Addams and Gomez Addams together, blended. And I'm looking into the eyes of this person, and everything, hair, clothing, is black with chrome jewelry all over them and skulls everywhere. And their skin is white as snow. And I went to introduce myself, and the first thing out of their mouth after I said, "Welcome to the medical examiner's office," was, "I just want you to know I speak with the dead on a regular basis." And that's how my summer began in 1998. I don't know if they commune with the dead or not, but I do know this. The dead do, in fact, have a language. And as a death investigator, it is incumbent upon us to learn that language. And today, we're going to start on a series of educational podcasts. And our first one up is going to be, how in the world do we measure time since death? I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave, did you know? I don't know if I've told you this, brother. Did you know that the dead actually do make sounds? Have I told you that before?
I don't know if you've told me that before, but I've told enough stories about the dead rising from the grave to scare children that,
This is not really in the spiritual realm, but people have often asked me, inevitably, I will get questions about ghosts all the time, because I spent so much time in the morgue, over the course of my career. And I never experienced any kind of apparition or, voices, that came to me. I didn't have objects in my home that moved across the table or, red rum written on the mirror in my bathroom or anything like that.
Yeah.
That never happened for me. But something that really got my attention in the morgue when I was very young, I just started working, and it was probably my probably second month. We had an older gentleman that was on the table, and I was
Okay, wait a minute. On the table, meaning dead?
Yeah.
Okay.
He was on the table dead.
Making sure.
He had been in the cooler all night. We'd brought him in, and for whatever reason, he had no medical history. And the coroner, this was in New Orleans, the coroner decided that we should do the autopsy because we were the ones that were going to have to sign the death certificate. And our office down there worked. It didn't matter that you were older, but if you had no medical history and it was incumbent upon the coroner to sign the death certificate, they want to know what they're getting into. And, you know, the bet is always on heart disease because we all carry some level of atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. Okay. And so anyway, we had this guy in the cooler all night. I'd taken him out in preparation for the forensic pathologist to show up. And we had several cases that we were doing that day. I remember this day. It just stands out in my mind because of what I'm about to tell you. And I had all the instruments laid out. And so what happens at an autopsy is the assistant or the diener, again, I tell everybody that literally is an old German word that translates literally into servant of the dead. The diener, which was me, we're all gowned up and we're standing there, and the pathologist is walking around with his clipboard, right? And he is examining, we're taking measurements. The guy's laying on the table face up or in a supine position. And he looks at me and says, "Okay, Joe, I'm ready to look at the back." So what you have to do is you put in my case, I'm on the left side of the body. If you're looking at the feet from the top of the head, I put my left hand on the gentleman's hip. I put my right hand on his shoulder, and I roll him toward me, Dave. And as I'm rolling him, almost like rumbling thunder off in the distance, I hear a sound. And here's the sound. It goes like this. Well, it got my attention, to say the very least. And I looked down, and the gentleman's mouth was slightly open. And the pathologist looked at me, knowing I was young. I had not experienced this before. He said, "Got your attention, didn't it?" And I was like, "Yeah, it really did." He says, "Okay, before you think he's alive or that there's a ghost with us, explain to me what just happened." And I sat there shaking. I think the whole body was shaking. I'm still holding on to him.
Well, first, Doc, I peed my pants.
And I thought about it, and I said, "Well, I'm thinking in my mind it has something to do with air. Just because you're dead doesn't mean that your vocal cords are not still functional." And I was right. I got it. I got high marks for this, because what happened is, as you roll him, the lungs actually, pressure is applied to them from the sides, and air is traveling out, and it's still passing over the vocal cords, and that sound issues forth from the mouth. And so in that moment, I had a great lesson. And I've talked to other people that have worked in the morgue, and I remember having drinks many years later and sitting around with a couple of people that have worked in the morgue and that were investigators. And this is something I've experienced on scenes too. And you talk about, because I know it's coming, I understand it, but if you've got some cops that are standing there and you roll the body over, and I actually had one guy run out of the room at a crime scene. You get all of these ideas. And one of the things I came up with was that when you think about in the movies, and even when we were kids and we watched Scooby-Doo, what sound did the dead bodies make? You know, the ghost, they would go, "Huh." And I have to think that somewhere along the continuum, the creative continuum, somebody had heard this before, and that's where it came up. Because, Ghost in Sheets, that's like the what do they call them? It's like a funeral shawl or a funeral covering that they would put over the bodies. And so that's where, and also bodies are covered with a sheet at death. I don't know why people do that. I've always been amazed by that people think that it's necessary to put a sheet over the body. And some people will say, well, it's out of respect for the dead. The dead don't care. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that people are uncomfortable around the dead. And in this business, in the business of death investigation, you have to warm up. You have to warm up to the fact that you're going to be in a room with a dead body and that you're going to be trying to understand what happened to them. And so that's kind of, you begin to think about that, and you think about all of the little intricacies involved with us doing assessments out in the field. And it gives you pause, and you have to think about what clues do you look for, Dave? And, in our world, the biggest thing is this idea of time since death or post mortem interval.
Do you teach this in college, Joe?
Yes.
The whole post mortem
Oh yeah.
Okay.
It's part and parcel of, I teach a class called Medical Legal Death Investigation.
Okay.
And I have taught it I created it Dave, this is my 20th year in higher education. I created that class 20 years ago, believe it or not. And it's based on the national standards. Yeah.
I got to say something. I apologize for not having already done this, but I've met so many of your students at CrimeCon, the last two, that have come to the booth when you were, in another area, and they have told me stories about Professor Morgan. And I just want to tell you, I haven't forgot to tell you the impact you've had. But for those of you who are familiar with Joe as a professor, understand he really does that. It's at Jacksonville State University in Jacksonville, Alabama. When I first moved here, it was one of the things that people bragged about was how police departments, the government, FBI, all these other groups send their people to be trained, to learn things at JSU and the forensic studies that take place at that college. And I had no idea it was because of Joseph Scott Morgan.
It's not. No, I can't take full credit for. We actually have a division within our university, and this is unique to our university, called CFAF, which is the Center for Applied Forensics, and it's our own crime lab on campus, and it's not for the students. It's part of the university, and the people that work there work as instructors, but first and foremost, they are practicing forensic scientists. And we live in a very, as you well know, Dave, we're practically neighbors. We live in a very rural area that we don't have a lot of rich people around us. And so the departments, and this is a kind to cool thing that I love, because it goes into the education and the training of investigators. Our crime scene unit that we send out from the university is staffed, now dig this, by graduate level crime scene investigators that are also bench trained forensic scientists. And we serve like an 8-county area. So if we have like a major crime, like a multiple homicide in some rural area, you're not going to get somebody that's going to show up with their phone to take a picture. All of the sheriffs have gotten together in this area in Northeast Alabama, pool their money. And so when there's a major crime in one of these isolated areas, you get the full bore here. I mean, they show up, they process the scene, and so you have these graduate forensic scientists that are out there working these cases in what a lot of people would regard as the sticks. And for me, I think it's a real blessing, because otherwise they wouldn't have access to this kind of technology and that sort of thing.
Whenever somebody talks about where we live, and geographically speaking, friends, for those of us, Joe and I both lived in metropolitan areas. Joe, New Orleans and Atlanta, me, Atlanta, Los Angeles. But I remember, in particular, in the Atlanta metro area, that where I lived, it was about I don't know, 45 minutes to an hour to go to the Braves and, see a game. I'm not that much further from it here. Where we live is so convenient to Atlanta, Birmingham, and Chattanooga that it's like this triangle area of the most beautiful places to be. And in the smack dab in the middle of it is Jacksonville State University, where the most incredible things are being done with the study of forensics. Plus, when you did the reenactment with Nancy Grace on Ellen Greenberg, her suicide with 20 knife wounds to back, neck, and chest, you guys were able to do that on the campus, right?
Yeah, we reconstructed that actually at one of our facilities, and we've just moved into a new facility that has let me get this straight. I know I'm going to misspeak. We've got an 8-room crime scene house inside of an academic building. I mean, complete with a bathroom. We've even got a laundry room.
You walked me into that. That's what you were when we took the tour. Yeah, I felt like I was actually in an apartment.
I know, it looks just like that. And so, that's one of the things. I'll have a gross anatomy lab there pretty soon where we will actually have cadavers for undergraduate students. Digital forensics laboratory. I mean, it's really pretty cool to have this and to be able to educate. And a lot of our students are first generation college attendees. And so when they walk out of the university, they actually have a degree where they can step into a position to be a practitioner. And you asked me about this idea. Do I teach this in class? Mm-hmm. The thing about, our faculty is that we're all current or former practitioners. And so, we've all been in the field. We're not theorists sitting in some kind of ivy covered tower somewhere. We're actually at least current or former practitioners, and we have to stay on our game and stay sharp. And, the basics, my area of expertise is medical legal death investigation, studying the coroner system and all that sort of thing, but just the practical stuff. And a lot of people you'll hear television shows and all these sorts of things that'll have something in the title that will say, I speak with the dead, or the dead have a language of their own, or I converse with the dead. And that's why I found it interesting, that comment that I made early on about that student that showed up, and they're saying they actually converse with the dead. And that individual they literally meant it. As we found out, that individual was there for a summer. It was horrible decision on our part. And, because they would go out on scenes with us. Can you imagine having to deal with a family that's just lost a loved one, and you've got this person going out onto a scene with you with a grieving family, and they're dressed, they look like the Grim Reaper. And so they had to make adjustments to the way they were dressing. It had to be respectful and all this sort of stuff, but there was still that essence there. And that's one of the things that you have to dispel with my students when I'm trying to teach them things. One of the first things they learn is Post Mortem Interval, is you have to get them past this kind of, first off, everyone, and me included, going back years and years, we all have like an indwelling fear of the dead. If you've never been around a dead body, it's almost like you have to jump or cross over that threshold before you get comfortable with the fact that you're standing there, you're looking at a deceased individual, and it's a shock to the system the first time it happens. And I do not judge anybody harshly that has reacted to the dead in a particular way, because no one can predict. I've seen very, how do you say it? Big guys that are, man. They look like, they could just tear a New York City phone book in half, if anybody still knows what a phone book is. And they will run screaming out of the room, or no, I'm not going to be in here while this is being done.
Oh, wow.
And so I've encountered that, but you have to get past that if you truly want to understand the language of the dead.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining this sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
With any language, you have to have some kind of, I don't know a better term for it, a codex, I guess. I think that my mind goes to like the Rosetta Stone, and people think about, that they were able to, utilizing that artifact that they found, they could decipher things, dead languages, those sorts of things, and try to understand the ancients. The dead are really no different. And, when people say they speak with the dead or the dead speak to them and all this sort of thing, you'll also hear, I speak for those that can no longer speak for themselves. I think I even used to have a T-shirt that said that from the Baltimore Homicide Division. I was up there at a class one time. My favorite, though, has always been "My day begins when yours ends," and that was the New Orleans Homicide Division.
Wow.
Bit distasteful. I wouldn't wear that one, but for us, scientifically, there is a codex. And Dave, when people die, I guess I would have to ask you, my friend, what's kind of the first thing that comes to mind for you as far as changes? What's a term you've heard in the past that kind of jumps out to you as it applies to changes after death?
It's funny because when you mentioned post-mortem interval, I've heard that term so many times. I had to think about it because I think it's been misused. Because in its actual form, it means the time between the last breath and the time the person is found. Correct?
Yes. Yeah.
That's the right. Post-mortem interval, and it can be days, weeks, months, or minutes.
Yeah. Yes.
And so it encompasses all of that. When I think of the first thing of somebody when they die, because I'm a 12-year-old boy at heart, I think that their bowels are loose and everything comes out. That's what I've been told, and that's what I think.
And it does happen. It does happen.
There you go.
Yes. Yeah.
To everyone?
And no, not to everyone. And bladders will also void as well. So you'll have that combination. But no, it doesn't happen in every case. But in the immediate, I think that when we're trying to determine the postmortem interval, we think of, we've heard the term. It's in the vernacular, cold and stiff, right? Yeah. And that's kind of crept into our language. And I've heard people out on crime scenes, they'll say, wow, that guy's stiff as a board. One of the biggest misconceptions, I think, and we're talking specifically about rigor mortis, and it's also used, and I've had people try to correct me on this, and I'm like, okay, whatever. There's another term, you'll hear rigor mortis, and you'll hear rigidity. So those three things, and essentially what it comes down to is a stiffening. And people will say, well, the scene, they're stiff as a board. One of the big misconceptions that is out there about rigor is that it stays forever and ever. Amen. And it doesn't. It doesn't. And that's one of the beauty of that, Dave, is that it's one of the markers that we look for. Because when someone dies, just so that we understand, at a cellular level, you have a process that's going on in your body that's called cellular respiration. Okay. And so in cellular respiration, you're creating these little balls of energy, and it's called ATP. Okay. So, and just imagine it's spinning around in a circle and it's throwing off these little balls of energy, ATP. Well, as that's happening and you die, that little cycle, the cellular respiration, ceases. And instead of a try, which is part of a TP, you go to a die, which is a DP. And instead of throwing off little balls of energy with ADP, it throws off lactic acid. And so one of the things I tell my kids at Jack State is, listen, and at Police Academy too, how many of you guys have ever you haven't worked out in a while, okay? And you go to the gym, you do push-ups, maybe you do some light weights, you don't sense it, you can feel the tension, all that sort of stuff. And then the next morning, you wake up and you're stiff as a board. Hey, guess what happened? You've got lactic acid buildup. And so that's what's happening with the dead. And I'll tell my kids that feeling that you have in the morning in life, that's as close as you will feel to rigor mortis.
So when somebody wakes up and they say, I feel like death warmed over, that actually is what death warmed over feels like. Thank you, Joe.
No. That's, yeah, I guess we could say that. There's all kinds of terms that people apply to death.
How
1
quickly,
foot in the
though?
grave. Go ahead.
How, and I mean this, I'm not trying to be funny or anything, because most of us who don't deal with dead bodies,
yeah,
we see them in movies and we see them in TV shows. Occasionally, we'll be around a loved one when they pass, and that's a different scenario as they die in your arms while you're sitting there, and you see the life, you see the lights turn out.
Yes,
and
yes, you do.
You can actually physically see changes, and that's what I wanted to know when that happens. And we are seeing a change in the eyes in particular. I'll never forget the eyes. You know they're gone. There's no question about this person is gone. Their body is immediately going through immediate changes then.
Yeah, at a cellular level, it occurs like almost instantaneously, and a lot of people don't understand that. The dead will also take on a gray pallor. There's color change because in life, we're vibrant looking most of the time. You might not have rosy cheeks necessarily, but there's something, that the person is animated. Okay.
Yeah.
And that there's life there, and even people that are aged and infirm, you can still sense that, but, you have these moments in time, and I'm glad that you mentioned being with a loved one and you see them slip away. There are these experiences that people have with death, and with the aged in particular, particularly if you have an individual that is atrophied, which means, for instance, they're bedridden, and that's why you have to be really careful in your calculations. You have to understand the idea of their muscle mass and the effect of lack of metabolic activity at a cellular level in life. Okay. So if you have an elderly person in bed that is bedridden, atrophied, muscles are wasted, when they die, rigor sets in slower with them. It sets in slower. Whereas, on the other hand, if you have, let's say you've got a young man that's running from the police and he gets into a shootout with a cop, all right? Well, his metabolic activity is racing. And plus, he ain't atrophied.
Right.
He's got vibrant muscle tissue, that sort of thing. Rigor will sit in quicker with him than, say, someone else that is not quite as vital, physically. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And so that don't have that vitality. So when you're a death investigator and you're trying to assess a body at a scene, you have to it's not a static world that we live in. These people that do these studies about the dead and trying to assess what's going on with bodies and all these sorts of things, they really fall short in this area because they do it and this is the thing, when you read a lot of the text and everything, it'll say under ideal conditions.
Right.
Dave, listen to me. Do you actually think I've ever worked to death in ideal conditions? It's not like I'm in some kind of sealed off laboratory environment. I mean, we're in the real world. You know, we're out in the middle of an interstate highway working a car accident, or we're in a house where somebody has gone berserk with a baseball bat. These are not ideal conditions. The temps are all variable. You've got outdoor versus indoor. There's so many variables to this. But just so that folks understand, with Riger, it begins to set in, and this is controversial, what I'm about to say.
Okay.
It's kind of controversial. It's not really, but because people in the past have said it starts in the small muscles of the face. That's inaccurate. And when I say small muscles of the face, I'm talking about like the eyelids. All right.
Oh, okay.
It doesn't start in the small muscles of the face. It's first appreciable in the small muscle groups. It's starting everywhere. It starts immediately. Okay.
All over your body.
All over your body.
You're dead. There's nothing pumping around anymore.
There's nothing. And so it presents, you can appreciate it first, particularly in the jaw. The jaw will begin to kind of cinch up, and you have to be really careful. And I'll give you a little aside here. One of my favorite stories at Christmas time is Christmas Carol. With, Ebenezer Scrooge and the whole thing. And when Jacob Marley, the ghost of Jacob Marley, comes to visit Ebenezer Scrooge and tells him he's going to be visited by three ghosts, there's this one image in some of these theatrical things where the ghost of Jacob Marley actually takes the handkerchief off of his head as his mouth opens. Well, during Victorian times, particularly, they found it to be untoward for the dead to die and their mouth be open. And so what they would do is they would put a kerchief or a handkerchief around the head and tie it off up top. And so when Riger would set in, the jaw would clench shut. Okay. And it begins to be appreciated in the small muscles, and then it kind of extends out into the extremities, where you're getting into the shoulders, the hands, the fingers, the toes. And with that rigidity, you understand that there are markers in time where you assess it first off by the level of resistance or rigidity. Like, I've had little old ladies that have died, Dave. I remember one lady in particular that was a homicide victim that had been beaten to death. And we were trying to examine her mouth, and it took every ounce. And I used to be like, I wasn't a bodybuilder, but I was big. I lifted weights constantly. And this is when I was a young man working in the morgue.
Then you met a girl, and
and I could not open her jaw. That's how strong the rigidity was in her jaw. And finally, I was able to, but it took a great deal of doing. That's how stiff that this presentation is throughout the body. There's a classic photo that's in a book, and I recommend anybody that can get their hands on this book. It's called Spitz and Fisher, Medical Legal Death Investigation. It's like our Bible. Mm-hmm. And there's a photo that was donated by the OCME, the Office of Chief Medical Examiner in New York. And it's a black and white from the 20s. And Dave, they have a man who is completely nude, and the body of a man who's completely nude, and his head is resting on the seat of a chair, and his heels are resting on the seat of another chair, and they're fully spread. It goes the length of his body, and there's nothing supporting underneath his body. It looks like you could take a shirt and iron a shirt. That's how rigid his body is. And they took that photo back, I think it was like in the 20s, to demonstrate the level of rigidity. But here's the trick with and how we use this to our advantage as a death investigator is, first off, there's time. We begin to assess that marker relative to the level of rigidity. Is it fully set in? And it's going to take several hours for it to set in. And if the body is found, say, in an abnormal position, I'll give you an example. Let's say that you've got a homicide, and I've actually had this happen, where someone dies in a chair and they're seated, and maybe they've been murdered, and they're taken out of the chair, and rigor has begun to develop, and it might be almost completely fixed at that point in time, and they're transported to another location, and you see them laying out on the side of the road, and it looks like there's an invisible chair underneath them. You know at that moment in time that this is, because people don't die in that position, you know that something has happened along the way. And in this case, and this does happen quite a bit, people will be involved in something like a homicide, and they're scratching their head thinking, what in the world am I going to do with a dead body? And so as that body sits there, it's stiffening. The work with the dead body doesn't stop just because the perpetrator is confused. The body is going to continue to change. And there's other changes that we'll get to. But in this particular instance, I remember distinctly having a guy that was set out in a patch of pine forest. And he wasn't in a seated position per se, but he was leaned, his back was leaned against the base of a tree so that his shoulder blades were running in a vertical, they were up and down like this, and his legs were pulled up, into a seating position. And as it turns out, he had been executed in a chair, and they'd left him sit there for hours. So he was rigid at that point in time. And then you have individuals that are coming out of rigor. And so when you get to that point, you're looking at probably about 36 hours downrange from when death occurred, where they become what we refer to as flaccid.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining this sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
There's two types of burners in a chemistry class. You've got alcohol burners and gas burners. And the reason you have access to fire or heat is that heat facilitates certain experiments. And we all know that heat speeds things up. So if, for instance, if it is hot outside, like down here in beautiful Alabama where we live in the middle of summer, buddy, let me tell you something. You ever been on the asphalt in the middle of July in Alabama? It's 146 degrees on the surface there. If you have someone that dies there, there's going to be an appreciable speed to the rate at which rigor is going to set in with those individuals, as opposed to somebody that's maybe in a cooler area, maybe 70 degrees in the shade, that sort of thing. So you've got all these variables that are going to play into it. And then after a period of time, it could be like 24 to 36 hours downrange that it's going to dissipate. So you say, well, how do you know if in fact the person has been dead or they're not freshly dead? Well, I'll give you an indication. The biggest thing is we look for things like the smell. Okay. That presents, but the most critical thing is something called livor mortis, which is actually referred to. There's a couple of ways that people refer to it as. We have livor mortis, post mortem lividity, and that's a color change. And it's actually my favorite element to assess a body with relative to post-mortem interval, and I'll tell you why. It is not affected by heat at all, no temperature change whatsoever. It is totally and complete. The beauty of it is totally and completely gravitationally dependent. And look, if we had a physics person here, all right, they would argue this next point with me. Okay, I say in my class, gravity is a constant. It doesn't vary. Okay. They would say, of course it varies. You go to the poles, it's going to be variable there. It'll be variable at the equator and all these. Okay. All right. Thanks, Einstein. What I'm trying to say is gravity is gravity. All right. And with liquid, anybody that's ever owned a home, I know that when I was a kid, my mom was always worried about the crawl space under the house because where's water settling? Liquid seeks the lowest area. And so blood is no different. Now it's more viscous. It's thicker than water. However, it's still a liquid and it's going to settle to the lowest point. So if you've got, for example, the guy that was in the chair that died, when postmortem lividity sets in, and this is something you can appreciate, Dave, within about 20 minutes. Okay.
Really?
It's that quick. Yeah. Now it's not fixed,
right?
But within 20 minutes, you'll see blood settle. Just think about anybody that's ever had a kid, or maybe you were one of those kids. I wasn't, I couldn't do it, that would hang upside down on a monkey bar. You ever done that at a playground? I never could do that. But you see those kids that'll do that. What happens to their head? If they hang there for a while, what happens to their head?
Blood rushes to their head.
Yeah, it rushes to their head, and you can actually see a physical representation of it. The head will become red. The face will swell. It's the same principle with postmortem lividity or livor mortis. And so, and people say, God, that's an odd word, Morgan. Why are you saying that? Well, it's the same word that we use. And I love it. I love the English language because it's one of those words that when you have no other way to describe how furious and angry you are, and I have been at that state in my life. I don't know about you, Dave. You don't ever get angry, I don't think. The term we use is I was livid.
Yeah.
And so it's the same thing. It comes from that same root. And so you actually have color changes when you get angry. I'm sure everybody can identify with that. But blood is drawn to those lowest portions of the body from that perspective. The trick is that once that blood settles in those dependent areas, after a period of time, it doesn't migrate. And let me tell you how it works. So let's say you're seated in a chair, standard seat. An individual dies. You have points of contact. So you got your rear end, that's supporting your body, right? And you've got your arms maybe resting on the arms of a chair. That's a point of contact. Well, all that area where your bottom is in the chair, that's non-contacting, that's just surrounding that area, the blood will settle into the vessels there, and all the little capillary beds, remember you studied those in school, they're not meant to store blood. They're meant to circulate blood. And guess what? After a period of time, the blood leaches out of them, and it gets into what's called the interstitial tissue. And it literally, there's hardly a better way to explain it. It stains that sub-Q fat in the skin just beneath the surface. And it doesn't matter what you do, even embalming the body doesn't make it go away. And so it's fixed after a period of time. And when we come out to the scene, you know how with Riger, we assess the scene or assess the level of Riger by, remember I said the level of rigidity, how rigid is the body? And people can do this at home. If you'll just take your left arm and extend it, and take your right hand, or your index finger and your middle finger, and press it down on the palmar aspect of your forearm. Press it down hard. When you remove your fingers after a 5 count, you'll see that the skin blanches there. Well, that's what we look for in the dead, because if it's non-blanchable, guess what that means? It's fixed at that point in time. And in order to get fixed, it has to be that you're going to be looking roughly 8 to 10 hours where it's completely fixed. The one monkey wrench that can be thrown into all of this is that if you've got a dead body and blood begins to settle, and say it's a homicide and the perpetrator comes back and they decide to move the body, you can actually, and it's before it's fixed, you can actually get multiple presentations on multiple surfaces. So it gets kind of confusing. You have to pay very close attention. But suffice it to say, just those two elements alone, with rigor mortis and postmortem lividity, can tell us a lot about the dead. They do, in fact, speak to us, at least through the science. The question is, do we pay attention? Do we take note? And do we listen? I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.